in London. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Paul. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. A pleasure to be with you.
So, we're starting to see a common theme with incumbent presidents take out the opposition and sort of clear the path for your re-election. Is this what we're seeing in Ivory Coast? And if so, given its history, what are the risks?
Well, I think there are really two risks, and it's really important, I think, here to stress that Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, as it's known, is one of the most important countries in the whole of West and tropical Africa. It's the second largest economy in the region after Nigeria, a very, very dynamic economy. It's the world's biggest cocoa producer. It's one of the most influential countries in the whole Western African region. And it's been a key partner for the international community, a strong ally on issues such as climate change, stability in the Sahel, global issues. Um, and Alassane Ouattara has been one of the most influential and respected statesmen in the region over the past 14 years or so. But that is all those things explain why the loss of faith, if you like, the questions about this election are so important. The country has had a very, very difficult past. Um, from 2003 to 2011, there was a series of political crises. There was partition. There were at least two bouts of civil conflict, uh, partly motivated by really difficult, painful identity politics. And all that has been, not completely, but largely healed in the years from 2011 onwards, the past 14 years. But after Ouattara had done his second term, so that ran out in 2020, he ran for a third term under a new constitution which had been uh, drawn up a few years earlier. And that was a bit contentious, but many people understood because he'd been planning to retire and his chosen successor had stood down. His chosen successor had had sudden had had a heart attack, and this uh, and so Ouattara, if you like, stepped into the breach at the last minute, and many people understood. But this time around, it's quite different. Ouattara himself had said at the beginning of this year that there were plenty of potential successors on the government side in his own camp. He's spoken in the past of the need to hand over to a new generation. And on the opposition side, um, you didn't just have what you might call old school political leaders of his own generation with a past involvement in those crises from before, like former President Gbagbo, but you also had Tidjane Thiam, a one-time minister, but who's in his 60s, who's younger, and who, as you mentioned, he'd been a chief executive of Credit Suisse, and before that, chief executive of the financial giant Prudential um, in Europe. So somebody who'd had another career and represented, if you like, a moment of change. So the fact that both of these two figures are shut out means that many Ivorians feel they're being denied a meaningful choice. And that's really, really dangerous at a point when popular faith in democracy in West Africa is anyway badly shaken.
Might we see the outrage that we saw on the streets of Madagascar, the streets of Mozambique, and other parts of the continent over elections?
It's possible. And I think Madagascar, although in the case of Madagascar, obviously, because of its traditional links with Asia, the influence, if you like, is coming from elsewhere. But there is this same phenomenon. There's been a lot of urbanization. And in the case of Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, Abidjan, the main city, the population now is somewhere between 6 and 8 million. out of a national population around 30 million. So you've got a huge number of young people in urban areas, much more informed, of course, than before with social media and all the exchange of ideas and information that goes on these days. And there's a deep, deep disillusion, particularly in West Africa, with the political class, because there's a sense that with these changes in constitution, people running for third or even fourth terms, a sense that the political class who came in with the advent of democracy decades ago, they are now getting complacent. They've been in power a long time. And this is a region, of course, where, you look at the demography, the figures for population growth and the way that population's broken down. These are overwhelmingly youthful countries. In a typical West African country, probably half of the electorate, not just half the population, half of the electorate, half of all the voters are under the age of 30. And so there's a deep disillusion with the feeling that these older generation politicians are not allowing proper, effective democracy to function properly and allow a new generation to come in. And it's almost more in the most developed economies like Cote d'Ivoire that feeling is particularly strong and could be dangerous. Don't forget that in the countries just north of Cote d'Ivoire, you've got military regimes that have taken over.
All right, we're running out of time, but my experience is that when leaders start to notice their popularity waning, that's when they start to do things and enforce their stay in a sense. If there's a free and fair election and people show up in their numbers, would the game be up for Ouattara?
Well, there's just a tiny chance. It's only a tiny chance, but there's a tiny chance that he could lose, because last time around, turnout was just over 50%. It seems likely to be lower this time because Thiam and Gbagbo are excluded for bureaucratic reasons that some Ivorians agree with, some disagree with, but which many people know the government could have changed. It could have tweaked the rules or granted a pardon to Mr. Gbagbo to allow them both to run. But because Cote d'Ivoire has a two-round election system, the election system used in many French-speaking countries, there are one or two candidates, particularly one. There's a former commerce minister, Jean-Louis Billon, who is himself quite well known and who's running and plugs into one of the main opposition traditions. And if Ouattara falls below 50% on the first ballot, then it will go to a runoff. And it might just be that if Billon, it's hardly imaginable that Billon could win on the first ballot. But if Ouattara doesn't clinch outright victory on the first ballot, it might be that opposition votes will coalesce behind Billon in the
Right.
runoff. And there is a 1 month gap between the two rounds. So if Ouattara falls slightly short this weekend, there is the opposition would then have a month,
Yeah.
so plenty of time to get really organized and mobilize voters to turn out in the second ballot.
Paul, we're going to have to leave it there. Many thanks for your insights on this coming election.
You're welcome.
That's
Good to be with us.
Thank you. That's Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow at the Africa program at Chatham House, sharing his insights on the upcoming elections in Côte d'Ivoire, actually tomorrow.